For 2,000 years, this forest hid the secrets of one of the most important battles in antiquity. Here, a band of unruly barbarians challenged 3 legions of the mighty Roman army. Now, archaeologists are piecing together the fragments of that fateful day. Hello, I'm John Rhys Davis. Join us at the site of a massacre that shook the Roman Empire. Next on Archaeology. It is the stuff of legends. The great Augustus Caesar hopes to push the Roman Empire beyond the boundaries of the civilized world. His faithful commander, Publius Quinctilius Varus, is inexperienced and untested in the field of conflict. Varus and his army expect little in the way of resistance. They are tragically mistaken. Armed with spears and shields, a force of German tribesmen gather to face the might of Rome. At their head, a daring young chieftain by the name of Arminius. It was one of the bloodiest battles of antiquity. When the slaughter was finished, 20,000 of Rome's finest lay dead or dying in the mud. So great was the shock that for years afterwards, Augustus is said to have beaten his head on a door, shouting, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions!" Although the massacre left an indelible mark on history, the site of the battle disappeared in the tangle of an ancient forest. Today, archaeologists are reaping an unexpected harvest in a swatch of German farmland, hundreds of Roman artifacts. Have they found the site of Rome's defeat, the source of Caesar's nightmare? On a hill overlooking the city of Detmold in western Germany, an imposing statue immortalizes the young hero who stood against Rome. While the Romans mourned their defeat, the Germans celebrated it in myth and legend. But details of the battle seem lost forever to the passage of time. In the 1st century AD, Germany was a trackless land of mountains and forests, inhabited by tribes of warlike barbarians. Fiercely independent, they looked on the encroaching Romans with suspicion and dread. The century before, the great Julius Caesar had doubled the size of the Roman Empire. After subduing the Mediterranean, he turned northward and conquered Gaul, establishing a stronghold on the west bank of the Rhine. To consolidate Caesar's gains, the Emperor Augustus extended the frontier to the Danube. Next, he annexed the territory between the Rhine and the Elbe. An invasion seemed only a matter of time. But the Germans were ill-prepared. They needed a leader, someone charismatic who could unite them in a common cause, someone who could rally a force strong enough to confront a highly disciplined military machine. The young Arminius, only 27 years old, had unique credentials. Although a German chieftain, he was well trained in Roman tactics. As a Roman citizen, he had served in the army and sworn allegiance to the emperor, until Augustus made a fateful decision. He named Publius Quinctilius Varus governor of Germany. An aristocrat, Varus was also arrogant and tactless. His presence on German soil was all Arminius needed to spark a rebellion and unite the tribes. In 9 AD, Arminius seized his opportunity. He attacked Varus and his legions. After 3 days of fighting, the battle was over. 20,000 men, 10,000 camp followers were virtually annihilated. Unable to face the shame of such a catastrophe, Varus and his lieutenants committed suicide. Their voices silenced, Rome's most humiliating defeat in centuries faded into history. With few witnesses to recount the disaster, the whereabouts of the killing field also slipped away. For 2,000 years, no one has been certain exactly where the battle was fought. The search to find it would become one of the great detective stories of archaeology. It begins in the 16th century, when a manuscript written by the Roman historian Tacitus was discovered in a German monastery. Tacitus was the first to identify the Teutoburg forest, some 200 square miles of what is today gently rolling hills and woodlands. Over the years, Roman antiquities began to turn up in several different locations, but few associated them with the battle. Then, in 1987, an amateur archaeologist prospecting on a northern edge of the forest uncovered an unusual cache of new artifacts. The discovery attracted the attention of the Museum of Cultural History in nearby Osnabrück. The excavation, located at the foot of Kalkriese Mountain, has yielded hundreds of tiny fragments, each a clue that here something dramatic occurred. After years of painstaking analysis, Chief Archaeologist Susanne Wilbers-Rost and her team have pieced together the uniform of a Roman soldier and the weapons he carried.
We found, for example, this hook to fasten the epaulettes of a chainmail coat. It mentions a certain Marcus Aius of the first cohort of Fabricius.
The first cohort was the elite unit of a Roman legion. The find is hard evidence that heavily armed infantry were present in the area.
This javelin clamp was used to attach the iron to the wooden shaft of a Roman javelin, a very long weapon. The base section of the javelin could be driven firmly into the ground. The sandals were very important. They were made of leather and had iron cleats in the soles. The helmet had a plume holder on which plumes could be fixed on special occasions. A Roman dinar, a silver coin. I don't know if you've already seen this. Look, there is a galley on it, a ship. Down here you can see the oars. We have several of this type. That fits into the context. But it's a rarity on this site. On this excavation, we've only found 6 or 7 silver coins.
These scattered relics of a Roman army bear mute testimony to an ancient conflict. But is it the infamous battle of 9 AD? Discoveries are a collection of copper coins. Wolfgang Schlutter, director of the museum, believes that they hold the answer.
Wir haben hier eine solche Kupfermünze.
Here we have a copper coin, of which we have found about 200 so far. These are surely only a fraction of the coins lost here. And these coins are the best way to date this event.
Roman soldiers were paid in copper coins. On one side was the hallmark of the Emperor Augustus. On the other, the stamp of their commander, Quinctilius Varus.
In the year 7 AD, Varus became the governor of Germania. Therefore, it was only from this date that he could put his stamp on the coin. So we can say on the one hand, we have found no coins dating after 9 AD, and because these coins were produced starting in the year 7, they could only have been lost in the year 7, 8, or 9. This would indicate that we have situated the Varus battle in 9 AD.
The location of the forgotten battleground now seems certain. Archaeologists have also excavated a strange-looking mound at the base of the mountain. their work reveals a man-made rampart some 600 feet long and 7 feet high.
Wir vermuten, dass die Römer von Osten kamen.
We suspect that the Romans came from the east. That is to say, they came from this direction and marched along this path. They were attacked from different ramparts, which in our opinion, the Germans had built for the ambush. So far, we have excavated only one of these ramparts. That rampart lies over in that direction, at the foot of the Kalkriese Mountain.
Das ist die alte Oberfläche.
This is the old ground level, from the time of the Romans. It clearly marks the outer edge of the rampart. The Romans came along this path, just below here. Then they were attacked from the rampart and were clearly annihilated.
The construction of a rampart suggests Arminius knew which route the advancing Roman column would take. But how did he know? Wolfgang Schlutter thinks his knowledge of the terrain gave the Germans an edge.
Die römischen Truppen sind von Osten gekommen.
The Roman troops came from the east. Now, presumably, they tried to get through here, between the Kalkriese Mountain and the Vian Mountain range. But they had to admit it was impossible due to the high altitudes. They retreated and went around the mountain using the shortest path possible to surmount this obstacle. The Roman troops had two possibilities. Either they could march in a long queue for 10 or 12 kilometers, in which case they were vulnerable to attack from the side, or they could march in wide formation. But then they faced continual traffic jams at the narrow passage points. Imagine a three-lane highway narrowing to one lane. Then you get traffic jams for many kilometers. And that is exactly what happened here.
Schlutter's findings confirmed Tacitus's account of the battle. Varus led his army through treacherous terrain. On one side, Tacitus records, it was flanked by marshes, bogs, and swamps. On the other, by densely wooded hills. Here, they encountered the ambush. It is deathly quiet in the Teutoburg forest. An autumn rain chills the air. The Germans, invisible behind their earthen ramparts, patiently wait. Anticipation steels their nerves. In the distance can be heard the footfalls of the approaching Romans. Then finally, out of the mist, a golden eagle appears, the battle standard of a Roman legion. Troops, pulled apart by the long march, are caught by surprise. Trapped in close quarters, their spears and swords become useless. Combat is hand to hand. Within moments, the dying begins. Archaeologist Michael Geschter thinks the Battle of Teutoburg Forest was no battle at all. It was a massacre.
Diese kleinen Truppen römischer Soldaten, die eigentlich nur
These troops of Roman soldiers were only trained to fight in open fields. They were not suited to ward off small, partisan attacks. Because of this, they were massacred man for man. Isolated troops were able to fight their way through, others surrendered and were butchered. And still others fought on, but were overrun by the Germans, who were more familiar with the terrain.
The overwhelming success of their ambush may explain why few German artifacts have been found. Mostly the fragments of a Roman army literally torn to shreds, their bodies and their weapons plundered. How could such a disaster befall an army that time after time followed Julius Caesar into battle and reigned victorious? Christopher Ruger, professor of Roman studies at the University of Bonn, thinks Quinctilius Varus was to blame.
He acquired his experience in provincial administration in quite a different hotspot of Rome. Syria, that was at the time, Palestine. It was turmoily, as rebellious as it is now between Israel and all the Arab states. There were factions, there were PLOs, there were Haganahs and whatnot, and Varus pretty well muddled through this sort of mess in the east. But he never had experience with a guerrilla warfare beyond north of the Alps.
Arminius dagegen war ein
Arminius, on the other hand, was a young German nobleman of the Cherusca tribe who had worked for the Romans as an auxiliary troop leader and had Roman citizenship. He was highly familiar with Roman military tactics. And this explains why Arminius knew the weaknesses of Roman military tactics when marching through difficult territory. His plan of attack in the Teutoburg forest was based on this knowledge.
Im Bereich des Teutoburger Waldes.
They operated in small units and on swampy, marshy grounds, in forests, as Tacitus recalls. And of course, the Romans were afraid of the forest, whereas the Germanic warriors just loved the bushes. They just loved the bush. They were able to operate very much more efficient in country like that.
Zum anderen ist auch dazu zu sagen, dass es im September jetzt
It should also be said that it was raining that September, and the Roman equipment became heavy since it was becoming waterlogged. The Germans, of course, had no armor, only simple wooden shields. Accordingly, their equipment did not become as heavy as that of the Roman soldiers.
When the Romans were ambushed, they were heading back to their winter quarters at Haltern, a heavily fortified garrison east of the Rhine. A team of archaeologists led by Rudolf Askamp, director of the Roman Museum in Haltern, have been excavating the site.
Das Lager von Haltern wurde wahrscheinlich.
Archaeologists now believe that the camp of Haltern was probably built around the year 0. The camp existed up to the year 9 AD, when it was destroyed in connection with the slaughter in the Teutoburg forest. We have evidence that one of the legions that went under in this massacre was the 19th Legion. It was previously stationed in Haltern.
In Haltern vorher stationiert war.
We have cleared the bones of the dirt and are now reinforcing them with plaster so that we can get them to the museum intact. Otherwise, they would break. Over here, we see the remains of the skull. We have only the outline, which we can just barely recognize. Here, I'm going around once. Next, we see where the spinal cord, that is the neck, was attached to the head. And over here is what would have been the upper body.
Archaeologists now believe that Haltern was destroyed by the Germans as part of a larger strategy to stop the empire's expansion and eventually weaken its grip on the Rhine. 6 years after the battle, Augustus, bent on revenge, sent his son-in-law Germanicus back into the Teutoburg forest. According to Tacitus, the scene lived up to all its horrible associations. A half-ruined breastwork and shallow ditch showed where the last pathetic remnant had gathered. On the open ground were whitening bones, scattered where men had fled, heaped up where they had stood and fought back. Fragments of spears and of horses' limbs lay there, also human heads fastened to tree trunks. In groves nearby were the outlandish altars at which the Germans had massacred the Roman colonels and senior commanders. Germanicus conducted several retaliatory raids against the Germans. Among his duties was an order to retrieve the golden eagles of the 3 lost legions captured by Arminius during the battle. And at stake was the pride of the Roman army.
Die 3 Legionen, die dort vernichtet
The
wurden,
3 legions that were destroyed, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, never existed again. It was typical of the Romans not to reinstate a destroyed legion.
wieder aufgestellt wurde.
It was an unheard loss. Ever since Carthage and Hannibal's battles, it was the biggest blow to the Roman army. So many losses, 30,000 people lost. They could have recruited them back in a whiff, in a year's time, but it affected Roman pride. It affected the Gloria Romanorum. The big issue of Rome was the pride of its army, and that was affected. So it was much more a political blow than a military one.
Die Adler sind natürlich dann nach
The eagles were brought back to Rome, and then we don't know. Either they were destroyed or melted down in the course of the centuries.
eingeschmolzen.
The Battle of Teutoburg Forest once and for all put an end to the dream of expansion. Today, the monument in Detmold commemorates a fleeting moment of glory. But it also serves as a reminder. Without Arminius, the hero of Teutoburg Forest, one can only wonder how history might have been different. Blooded by the loss of his crack legions, Augustus never again dared turn a coveting eye on the lands beyond the Rhine and Danube. For him and his successors, the loss marked a first crack in the imperial shield. For the Germanic peoples, it planted the seeds of a national consciousness that would transform the ancient world.